Picture this, it's a cold, dark night thousands of years ago. Somewhere in a smoky cave or a creaky wooden hut, a woman is in labor. No fluorescent lights, no beeping monitors, not even a clean towel, just a pile of straw, maybe some animal hides, and a couple of nervous relatives whispering prayers into the flickering firelight. Childbirth back then wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a high-stakes gamble where the prize was survival, and the odds weren't exactly in your favor. Welcome to the first part of our journey into the brutal history of childbirth mortality, where we'll uncover the raw, unfiltered reality of what our ancestors endured to bring life into the world. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll want to send a thank you note to modern medicine. Let's rewind the clock to a time when healthcare was more hope than science. Imagine being pregnant in ancient Egypt, medieval Europe, or even just a few hundred years ago. No prenatal checkups, no ultrasound selfies of your baby-to-be, no apps tracking your kicks. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous things a woman could face. In the 17th and 18th centuries, for example, maternal mortality rates in parts of Europe hovered between 10 to 20%. That means for every 10 women giving birth, 1 or 2 might not survive the process. And the babies, their chances were even shakier. Infant mortality could hit 30–50% in some communities, especially during tough times like famines or disease outbreaks. Compare that to today, where the global maternal mortality rate in developed countries is around 2%, and you realize we're living in a different universe. So why was childbirth such a death trap? Let's break it down. First off, nobody knew about germs until the 1800s. Midwives, who were often the only help available, might have been wise in the ways of birthing, but they weren't exactly scrubbing in like surgeons. Hands, tools, and birthing environments were often crawling with bacteria. Puerperal fever, a nasty postpartum infection, was a serial killer of new mothers. A woman could push through a grueling delivery, hold her healthy baby, and then a few days later be taken out by a fever because nobody thought to boil the water or wash the rags. It was so common that some called it the curse of childbirth, and that was just one piece of the puzzle. Then there were the complications. Breech births where the baby comes out feet first, or prolonged labors that lasted days could turn deadly fast. Hemorrhaging good luck, there were no blood transfusions. A baby stuck in the birth canal, no C-sections to save the day. The best tools available were crude forceps or a midwife's practiced hands, and even those could do more harm than good if things went south. Herbal remedies like willow bark or opium-based tinctures might dull the pain for a lucky few, but they were no match for serious complications. And let's not forget the social factors: poor nutrition, backbreaking work during pregnancy, and zero understanding of prenatal care meant many women went into labor already on the edge of survival. Now, don't get me wrong, our ancestors weren't clueless. They had their methods, and some were pretty ingenious for the time. In ancient cultures, midwives were the unsung heroes passing down knowledge through generations. Some used rituals like chanting or burning herbs to keep evil spirits at bay, which didn't help much, but points for effort. Others figured out practical tricks like positioning a woman upright to let gravity help, or using oils to ease delivery. But these were drops in a bucket of chaos. Without a basic grasp of anatomy or infection control, even the most skilled midwife was fighting blindfolded. Here's where it gets wild. While we're freaking out about a Wi-Fi outage or a late food delivery order, our ancestors were staring down death just to bring the next generation into existence. Imagine the sheer grit it took to go through that, knowing the risks with no guarantee you'd see the other side. It makes you wonder, how did humanity even make it this far? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just luck. It was a mix of raw resilience, trial and error knowledge, and a stubborn refusal to give up. But before we get too cozy patting ourselves on the back for surviving, let's ask ourselves, what would we do without our modern safety nets? Could we handle the kind of labor pains our ancestors faced head on? As we move forward, we're going to dive deeper into the nitty-gritty of how these early birthing practices shaped humanity's survival, and how they compared to the cushy epidural-fueled deliveries of today. What made some women and babies beat the odds while others didn't? And what can we learn from a time when every birth was a battle? Stick with me, because the story only gets crazier from here. Alright, we've just taken a peek into the terrifying world of childbirth in the past, where every delivery was like playing a high-stakes game with no rule book. Women faced infection complications and a shocking lack of basic medical knowledge, all while trying to bring new life into the world. But here's the thing, humanity kept going. So how did we survive those brutal odds? In this part, we're diving deeper into the raw mechanics of ancient childbirth, the makeshift methods our ancestors used to beat the Reaper, and what those early struggles tell us about the miracle of modern medicine. Let's keep this time machine rolling and see how our species clawed its way through the original labor pains. Let's zoom in on the scene of a birth, say a few thousand years ago, in a village somewhere in ancient Europe or Mesopotamia. The mother's in labor, surrounded by a small crew, maybe a midwife, an aunt, or a neighbor who's seen a birth or two. The air's thick with tension sweat and the faint smell of herbs burning to ward off bad spirits. The tools, a sharp flint knife for cutting the umbilical cord, some woven reeds or cloth for soaking up blood, and a whole lot of hope. Midwives were the rock stars here, often the only ones with any know-how. They'd learned their craft through years of watching, doing, and praying things didn't go sideways. But their knowledge was limited by what they could see and touch. No x-rays, no fetal monitors, just gut instinct and experience. What did they do when things got dicey? Well, they got creative. For a baby in a bad position, a skilled midwife might try to turn it manually, pushing and prodding through the mother's belly, a risky move that could save lives or cause serious harm. Prolonged labor, they might brew teas from plants like raspberry leaves to speed things up, though nobody knew why or if they worked. Pain relief, in some cultures like ancient Egypt, they used poppy-based concoctions, early versions of opium, to take the edge off. But these were rare, and most women just had to grit their teeth and push through. Compare that to today, where we've got epidurals that let you nap through contractions while binge-watching your favorite show. Our ancestors would probably roll their eyes at us, muttering, "You call that labor?" But here's the kicker. Even with these tricks, the odds were grim because of what they didn't know. Take hygiene. Until the 19th century, nobody connected dirty hands or tools to infections like puerperal fever, which could wipe out a new mother days after a successful birth. In medieval Europe, birthing rooms were often cramped, dark, and filthy, perfect breeding grounds for bacteria, and if a mother hemorrhaged, there was little anyone could do. Blood loss was a mystery. They didn't know about blood types or transfusions. Some cultures tried to stop bleeding with poultices of herbs, or even spider webs. Yes, spider webs, because why not? But these were about as effective as wishing really hard. So what kept humanity going? A mix of biology, strategy, and sheer stubbornness. Women's bodies are built for childbirth, but they're not perfect. Evolution gave us big-brained babies, which is great for inventing wheels and smartphones, but terrible for fitting through the birth canal. That's why human births are so risky compared to, say, a deer dropping a fawn in a field. But our ancestors had one ace up their sleeve: community. In many societies, childbirth was a group effort. Women supported each other, sharing knowledge, holding hands, and taking turns keeping the fire going. This teamwork wasn't just emotional, it was practical. A midwife with a track record of successful deliveries was a village treasure, and her skills could mean the difference between a growing family and a tragedy. Still, not every story had a happy ending. Some communities didn't make it. Harsh climates, poor diets, or bad luck could decimate a group's ability to reproduce. Archaeological digs show us the cost tiny infant skeletons buried alongside mothers, silent proof of how fragile life was. But those who survived passed on critical lessons. Over time, some cultures figured out that cleaner water or better nutrition during pregnancy led to healthier babies, even if they didn't know why. In ancient Rome, for instance, wealthier women had access to better food and rest, giving them a slight edge over their poorer counterparts. It wasn't fair, but it was a glimpse of how knowledge could shift the odds. Now let's pause for a second and laugh at ourselves. Today we panic if our delivery room doesn't have Wi-Fi, or if the hospital cafeteria runs out of our favorite smoothie. Meanwhile, our ancestors were out here delivering babies in the middle of a blizzard with nothing but a stick to bite down on, and a prayer to whatever gods they believed in. It's almost embarrassing how soft we've gotten right, but that softness is a privilege earned by centuries of trial, error, and loss. Every epidural, every sterile scalpel, every neonatal ICU is a monument to the women who didn't make it and the ones who fought through anyway. So what's the big takeaway here? Those early childbirth struggles shaped us in ways we barely think about. The resilience of those mothers and midwives laid the groundwork for humanity's survival, pushing us to adapt, learn, and eventually build a world where childbirth is safer than ever. But we're not done yet. How did we go from flint knives to state-of-the-art hospitals? And what can we learn from the past to keep pushing forward? Let's keep digging into this story, because the leap from ancient labor pains to modern miracles is a tale worth telling. What do you think? Could you have handled a cave-style delivery, or are you team epidural all the way? Let's find out where this journey takes us next. So we've just trudged through the gritty, nerve-wracking world of ancient childbirth, where every labor was a high-stakes showdown with no guarantee of a happy ending. We've seen how our ancestors relied on raw grit, a sprinkle of herbal know-how, and a whole lot of community spirit to keep humanity chugging along. But now let's fast forward a bit, not all the way to our cushy modern delivery rooms, but to the turning points that started to tip the scales in favor of survival. In this part, we're exploring how humanity began to outsmart the dangers of childbirth, the slow climb towards safer deliveries, and what those hard-won lessons mean for us today. Grab a seat, because this is where the story starts to shift from survival of the fittest to survival of the smartest. Let's set the scene in the 18th and 19th centuries, where childbirth was still a gamble, but cracks of progress were starting to show. The big game changer science was finally waking up. People like Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor in the 1840s, noticed something wild. Women were dying of puerperal fever in hospitals at much higher rates than those giving birth at home. Why? Because doctors were waltzing from autopsies to delivery rooms without washing their hands. Semmelweis had a light bulb moment and started pushing hand washing with a chlorine solution. The result, death rates plummeted. Sounds obvious now, but back then he was laughed at by colleagues who thought washing hands was a waste of time. Imagine that doctor scoffing at hygiene while women paid the price. It's enough to make you want to scream into a pillow. This wasn't just about soap and water though. The 19th century brought other breakthroughs that started to tame the beast of childbirth mortality. Anesthesia, for one, began to creep into the scene. In 1847, James Young Simpson introduced chloroform to ease labor pains, a move that made childbirth less torturous, and in some cases safer by reducing maternal exhaustion. Of course, not everyone was on board. Some folks thought pain was a natural part of birth and that numbing it was cheating God or nature. Meanwhile, women were probably thinking, past the chloroform, I'm not here to play martyr. By the early 20th century, ether and other anesthetics were making deliveries less of a screaming ordeal, giving mothers a fighting chance to stay strong through labor. Then there was surgery, cesarean sections which date back to ancient times, hence the name tied to Julius Caesar, though that's likely a myth, were a last resort before the 1900s, because they were so risky. Without proper anesthesia or infection control, a C-section was often a death sentence for the mother, even if it saved the baby. But as surgical techniques improved and hospitals got cleaner, C-sections became a viable option for complicated births. By the mid-20th century, they were saving lives that would have been lost just a generation earlier. Add in blood transfusions, which started becoming practical around World War I, and suddenly hemorrhaging wasn't an automatic ticket to the grave. Now let's not get too starry-eyed about progress. These advancements were mostly for the lucky few in wealthier parts of the world. In many places, especially rural or poorer regions, women were still giving birth in conditions not far removed from medieval times, well into the 20th century. Even today, in some parts of the world, maternal mortality rates remain stubbornly high due to lack of access to hospitals, trained staff, or basic supplies. It's a stark reminder that progress isn't universal, and the gap between the haves and have-nots is as old as dirt. But here's where it gets interesting. These early medical wins didn't just save lives, they changed how we think about childbirth. It went from a roll of the dice to something we could actually control bit by bit. Midwives started training with medical knowledge. Hospitals became places of healing rather than death traps, and women began to expect better care. This shift wasn't just physical, it was cultural. People started seeing childbirth as something that could be safe, not just survived. And that mindset paved the way for the high-tech epidural happy deliveries we take for granted today. Speaking of today, let's have a little fun with the contrast. While our great-great-grandmothers were biting down on leather straps to get through labor, we're out here debating whether to bring a Spotify playlist to the delivery room or which brand of organic swaddle is the softest. It's almost comical how far we've swung. But that swing didn't happen by accident. It's built on the backs of centuries of women who pushed through unimaginable odds and the slow, stubborn march of science that learned from their losses. Makes you wonder, are we really as tough as they were? Or are we just coasting on their victories? So, what's the big lesson here? The fight to make childbirth safer taught us that knowledge, persistence, and a willingness to challenge, that's just how it is, can rewrite the rules of survival. Those early doctors, midwives, and mothers didn't just beat the odds, they reshaped them for us. But the story's not over. How did we get from chloroform and hand washing to the high-tech birthing suites of today? And what can we do to make sure every woman everywhere gets a fair shot at a safe delivery? Let's keep this journey going because the past has a lot to teach us about appreciating the present and preparing for the future. What do you think? Would you have trusted a 19th century doctor with a bottle of chloroform, or are you glad you're living in the age of epidurals? We've just traveled through a wild saga from the raw survival of the grittiest days of ancient childbirth to the dawn of medical breakthroughs that started turning the tide. We've seen women endure labor in caves with nothing but hope and a sharp stick, and we've watched science slowly claw its way to safer deliveries with hand-washing chloroform and C-sections. Now let's wrap this up by zooming into the modern era, where epidurals and high-tech hospitals are the norm, at least for some. In this final part, we're tying it all together, reflecting on how far we've come, and asking what we can learn from those brutal labor pains of the past to make the future even better. Plus, we'll toss in a little nudge to keep this conversation going. Let's dive in. Today, childbirth in much of the world is a far cry from the dice roll it once was. Walk into a hospital in a developed country, and you're greeted with sterile tools, beeping monitors, and a team of professionals who've trained for years to make sure you and your baby come out okay. Epidurals, those magical spinal injections that let you breeze through contractions, are practically a given for many. In 2025, about 60-70% of women in the U.S. opt for epidurals, and C-sections account for roughly 30% of births often planned for convenience or necessity. Neonatal intensive care units can save babies born weeks too early, and maternal mortality rates in places like Sweden or Canada are as low as 4 to 8 per 100,000 live births. That's a staggering drop from the 10 to 20% death rates of centuries past. We're not just surviving childbirth anymore, we're managing it like pros. But let's not pop the champagne just yet. While we're living in the golden age of obstetrics in some places, the story's different elsewhere. In low-income countries, maternal mortality can still hit 200 to 400 per 100,000 births, and access to basic care like a clean delivery room or a trained midwife is a luxury. Even in wealthier nations, disparities persist. Women of color in the U.S., for example, face maternal mortality rates 2 to 3 times higher than white women, often due to systemic issues like unequal access to care or biases in treatment. It's a sobering reminder that the miracles of modern medicine aren't evenly distributed, and we've got work to do to make sure every mother gets a fair shot. So what can we take away from this roller coaster of a history? First, let's give a standing ovation to our ancestors. Those women who pushed through labor in the harshest conditions, and the midwives who pieced together life-saving knowledge without textbooks, are the reason we're here. Their resilience forced humanity to adapt, learn, and innovate. Every sterile scalpel, every ultrasound machine, every vial of antibiotics is a tribute to their fight. But their story also teaches us something deeper: progress isn't automatic. It took stubborn scientists like Semmelweis who fought for hand washing against a tide of skeptics, and countless others who challenged the status quo to get us where we are. That's a lesson for today. Whether it's tackling healthcare gaps or addressing global inequalities, change comes from questioning what's normal and pushing for better. Here's where we get to laugh at ourselves a bit. While our ancestors were out there battling infections with nothing but herbs and grit, we're stressing over whether our hospital bag has the right snacks or if our birthing playlist is vibey enough. It's almost absurd how far we've come, from dodging death in a muddy hut to debating the merits of lavender-scented birthing suites. But that gap between then and now, it's a privilege we can't take for granted. Every time you walk into a doctor's office or pop a prenatal vitamin, you're standing on the shoulders of people who fought for survival with way less. Makes you wonder, are we as tough as they were, or are we just spoiled by their victories? Looking forward, the past has some serious wisdom to offer. Those ancient communities thrived because they leaned on each other, midwives, neighbors, families, all pitching in. Today, we can apply that same spirit to advocate for better healthcare access, support new moms, and push for policies that close those glaring gaps in maternal care. And let's not forget self-care, eating well, staying active, and getting regular checkups aren't just trendy, they're the modern equivalent of stacking the odds in your favor, just like our ancestors did with what little they had. The tools have changed, but the goal's the same: healthy moms, healthy babies, healthy communities. So here's the big question: what's next? If our ancestors could turn childbirth from a death trap into a science, what can we do to make it even safer, fairer, and more humane for everyone? Maybe it's supporting organizations that bring medical care to underserved areas, or maybe it's just appreciating the nurses who check your vitals with a smile. Whatever it is, the past shows us that progress is possible when we learn from what came before and keep pushing forward. Alright, that's a wrap on our journey through the wild, painful, and downright inspiring history of childbirth. From caves to hospitals, from flint knives to epidurals, we've seen how humanity turned one of its toughest challenges into a triumph. What do you think? How would you have fared in a medieval birthing room? Got a story about modern childbirth that makes you grateful for today's tech? Drop it in the comments below because we want to hear it. If this video got you thinking, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next dive into the crazy, fascinating past. Want more? Check out our video on the wildest medical breakthroughs that changed history for another dose of mind-blowing progress. Thanks for joining us on this ride. Here's to appreciating the miracles of today and building a better tomorrow. See you in the next one.